Asa friends, it's me, Matt. Welcome back to the channel, Hobby Vomit. It is time for our Weekly Retch, the second in a series of where I talk about what I read, what I watched, and what I played last week. So, let's get right into it. Movies that I watched last week. I watched one movie last week, and that was The Hateful Eight by Quentin Tarantino. I am a huge fan of Quentin Tarantino, love Quentin Tarantino. And this is my fourth watch of this. This is my first time watching the extended version of it in the serialized nature that Netflix kind of spliced it up into 4 episodes. And you know what? I think it really worked for this movie. I don't know if it's maybe the best way to watch it for your first time, but I do think it still worked really well. And this movie, I was lucky enough to see it when it first came out on 70 millimeter in theater with an intermission and everything. It was very cool. But I did not love it my first watch. I still liked it. I don't think Quentin Tarantino misses, so it was still good. But I will say on every subsequent watch, it's gotten higher and higher and higher for me. I love this movie now. It's probably a top 5, maybe a top 3 for me, Tarantino. It's tough. He's got so many good movies. But yeah, really great film. Really enjoyed it, and I'm hoping that this will be the first Hobby Vomit movie discussion. Some other friends of mine and myself all watched it, and hopefully this week we'll be recording a video discussion to be posted the following week, kind of a roundtable discussion. So yeah, that was what movie I watched last week. Books I read. So let's start with the books I finished. I finished 2 books last week. The first was Gardens of the Moon, the first book of Malazan. And I love that book. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. It wasn't perfect, but it was damn good for the first book in a series. And man, it was just, it's not a simple book to read. You have to be, phone's got to be down. You got to be locked in and paying attention because there's a lot of POVs. There's a lot of political intrigue and just a lot to keep track of. I think it's very doable, though, as long as you're paying attention and reading with intent. There's a glossary in the back. You have to use it. You just do. It was very much like when I read the first Game of Thrones. I think if you read the first Game of Thrones without having the show knowledge, I think you're good to go with reading Malazan, because Game of Thrones, there's a lot of characters, a lot of family, a lot of history between those families, a ton of political intrigue. I found myself in the glossary often to try and on the map to try and figure out where I was and who I was with and what their histories were with those other families. The same is true of Malazan, I think. But if you're okay with doing that, I think you can handle it. And I think it's really rewarding. I love Erickson's writing. It feels like I was reading a film. The way he broke down scenes and transitioned to POVs super often. I never felt super confused. And man, it was just epic. It felt like I was reading the finale of a 10-book series, not the first book of a 10-book series. Really cool magic, great character work, and just great political intrigue. I just kept getting surprised, and it just felt like the whole book every time I'd be like, oh, it's all coming together. And then the next chapter would be like, oh, it's really all coming together. Then it's really all coming together. And all the coming together is all coming together. Every chapter felt satisfying. So I'm really excited to get to the second book of Malazan, or however you say it. That's the first book I finished. Second book I finished was Murder at Spindle Manor, which is the first, I believe it's called The Lamplight Murders, is what the series is called. So it's the first book of that series, and I finished that last night. Shortish book, murder mystery, felt like a Knives Out meets The Thing, which, I love both of those movies. I don't love crime, but I do love murder mystery. I feel like they're different because murder mystery, it's usually you got a fun cast of characters. They're very colorful characters, cartoonish maybe, and that's how this one was as well. A great cast of characters, very memorable. And the thing that impressed me most about this book was the world building, because it's a fantasy murder mystery, and it didn't necessarily need that. But all the fantastical elements of the world building, I'm so intrigued to read on and learn more about it, because it just worked really well. There's still an element of mystery there, But yeah, I thought the mystery element was good. You know, maybe it was I didn't find it predictable. I'm sure people have read this and been like, "Oh, I figured it out in the first page," and good for you. I didn't, and I was along for the ride, and I thought everything was fair and good, and I really enjoyed it. So I gave this one a 4 out of 5. I did have a couple of little problems. Like there's an interlude where it's just like the author talking to you, and it felt really out of place. I think that happens a couple times. It felt really out of place. It doesn't start off with like, oh, here, no other part until halfway through the book does it feel like the author's talking to me, and then she just like butts in to tell me something. I'm like, that felt strange. And some of the writing's fine, but overall, I mean, I still really liked it. 4 out of 5. So that's Murder at Spindle Manor. I'm excited to read I think there's 2 other books out. The next one is, I believe it's like a Murder on the Orient Express. I think it might be the Lamplight Express or something like that, but basically Murder on a Train, so that sounds fun. So those are the 2 books I finished last week. I'm in the middle of, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 other books right now. 2 of which, 5 other books right now. I can count. We'll get there. It's either 4 or 5. 2 of which I talked about last time. So the first one, Dungeon Crawler Carl. My partner and I are both listening to this on audiobook. We're about 2 hours away from finishing it. This is my second listen and her first listen. She's really enjoying it. I'm enjoying it just fine. I don't know if I get the Dungeon Crawler Carl hype just yet. I think the humor is there for me and that works. I really like the character and the world building. To me, there's just too many slowdowns in between the moments. And I don't mind slow moments, but it's just stat building and gear and stuff like that, which if I wanted that, I'd just play a video game. I get enough of that in video games. I don't need someone in an audiobook telling me the stats and how this sword makes your charisma +1, and now your charisma is 3 instead of 2, and like paragraphs of that and paragraphs of that. So I get it's a whole genre, and that's awesome. Like, I'm sure people out there really enjoy that aspect of it. I don't. So I'm hoping that kind of goes away a little bit more in 2 and then a little bit more in 3, and it just becomes more about the story, which I'm thinking it probably will. And it seems like in most people's estimation, it gets better and better and better. So I definitely want to read on. I like it enough for that. And there's definitely been some moments where we'll just be sitting there doing our thing and listening, and we'll both just laugh out loud. Some really good humor. And I will say, as much as I don't love audiobooks, the narrator absolutely kills it in this book. I mean, he is incredible with all the voices. So excited to read on, finish this one, get it behind me again, and move on. I think right now I'm leaning towards 3.5, which I believe is what I gave it the first time. I think she's leaning a little closer to a 4, but we'll see how we land when we actually finish. So next book, also excuse me, also an audiobook, so same kind of troubles for my brain. I'm just not a huge audiobook fan, but that's kind of why I chose this book to listen via audiobook. It's called The Engineer. It's the second book of the Last Horizon series by Will White. I read the first book, and I'm listening to this second book. And I found with audiobooks, I think I enjoy it better when it's not the first book of a series. Because with the first book of a series, I can really slow down, reread, and get to know these characters. I know how there's just something about me reading a name on a page that helps me remember things better, to where if I'm only listening on a first book, there's just too much, especially in a fantasy world, like names of places. I don't know, what's a proper noun, what's not, and I just something about seeing it. But if I go into a second book, knowing all of that information, I find that it's a little bit easier for me. So I am enjoying this audiobook. It's definitely like it's not going to change my world or anything or my view on fantasy. It's very simple, kind of a fun fantasy superheroes in space. There's just like a ship that has a crew. They're kind of collecting the crew, and each one has a new power or a special power that they all combine, and they're using those to go on adventures, essentially. I'm still pretty early on in this book, so I just do this while I'm playing something mindless on the computer, but I'm enjoying it. But I'll probably be listening to this for another month or so, I would wager. So that's The Engineer. And then I started 2 new books. I started the first of the Wars of Light and Shadow by Jenny Wirtz. That is called The Curse of the Mist Wraith. This was published in 1993. the year I was born, and it feels, at least, I've not read enough to where I don't think it's tropey, but it feels like it's written like a traditional fantasy. Very beautiful prose, slower paced, which doesn't bother me. I think I'm super intrigued by the world. I've only read the first couple of chapters, but it kind of feels like a giant prelude, and I'm really enjoying it. Jenny Wirt's writing is just absolutely beautiful. I will say it's not as tough of a read as the Gallant. I find this to be a lot more digestible, which is nice because, I was worried. The Gallant is 100 pages, and I was finding myself having to look up words like every other sentence. And I was a little worried about doing a 10 series book where each book is 600 pages of all that. A lot of stopping and starting, but this one's not so bad. It's a lot more digestible, I think. And there is a glossary you'll have to be in to learn, or at least for me, learning characters and places. There's different worlds, so there's still a lot to digest. Just it's more of like the world building aspects a little harder to digest than as the actual writing. But really enjoying that. Excited to keep going with that as well. I am struggling a bit because I know I'm going to love both Malazan and Wars of Light and Shadow, but they're both 10-book series, and I'm worried that for myself, if it's fair, this might sound silly, but I wonder if it's fair to be doing both concurrently, because I'm afraid that it's going to take away from the other. Like right now, as much as I'm loving Curse of the Mistwraith, and I think they're both, I think they're both going to land 4.5 stars or higher. I think I just love the writing. I love the characters. I love everything about both of those series. But I do find myself like ready to get back to Malazan already. And I don't think that that's fair to Wars of Light and Shadow, because it's not that I like Malazan more. It's just anytime you're doing two things at the same time, you're going to compare them, which makes sense. But it feels like I watched the first Lord of the Rings movie, Fellowship, and then I was like, well, I'm going to start Star Wars too. And then I watched the first Star Wars, and then I went back to the second Lord of the Rings, then to the second Star Wars. And I just wonder if I'm going to feel the same sort of appreciation I would for each series as if I had read them separately. So I'm struggling. I'm definitely going to finish Curse of the Mistwraith, but then I might put that series down and just work on Malazan and then go back to Wars of Light and Shadow. I'm not sure. I'm still deciding, but such is the struggle of reading. I also want to leave some room for both of those are read-alongs through a channel, as well as the next book I'm about to talk about. And I want to leave a little room for pleasure reading. Not that I'm not enjoying this, but sometimes I just want to walk over to a shelf when I finish a book and be like, that one. But I can't really do that right now because I can't fit it in. So we'll see. I might drop it and then pick it back up. But if it sounds interesting, it's very good. It's about two brothers, one's of light, one's of shadow, kind of enemies, but they kind of have to work together to save a world. I'm not really sure. I'm not quite there. So, like I said, the first couple of chapters are really getting to know these two characters and bringing them together. So, not sure exactly what they're doing yet, but I'm assuming they're saving some kind of world. So, sorry, I think I said one more book. There's two more books. So, the first is, as you may know, my partner named Bree and we breed, which is where I read out loud to her. So, the book we are currently breeding is Best Served Cold by Joe Abercrombie. This is Fantasy Kill Bill, and I think I talked about it last time as well. Not much more needs to be said for Joe Abercrombie. If you like grimdark or morally gray characters, it's some of the best character work I've read. It's hilarious, lots of laughter breaks, and very clever too. Very quick, witty humor. I think it's not It's not pausing to tell you hey, this is the punchline. It's just move on, which I like that type of humor. And it's Fantasy Kill Bill. I love Quentin Tarantino. I love Kill Bill. I love a good revenge story. And this is shaping up to be one of the best, if not the best I've read. So really, really enjoying it. We're about halfway through. Excited to keep working on that. And then, so Murder at Spindle Manor, which I talked about, that was my bedtime Kindle read. I usually read a book in bed to help me fall asleep. So I try to pick books that I'm not needing to pay super well attention to, like a Malazan. But still, like, I want to read good books. I don't want to. For a while, I was intentionally choosing books that I thought that I'd be like, on, but I kind of just want to move away from that. So this is the third read along for Shelf Esteem, the channel that I'm doing Malazan and Wars of Light and Shadow with, and this is called Speaks the Nightbird, and this is the first in also a 10-book series. So lots of 10-book series. This is called the Matthew Corbett series. And honestly, I went into this one totally blind. I don't know much. I think it's like a historical fiction. This one's set during like the witch trials, and I don't know much beyond that. I've only read the first chapter, started it last night, and it's basically just he's on a carriage with some guy, and they're going into town, and they make a stop. So really nothing's happened so far. I don't know too much. But this is my first Robert McCammon book that I'll finish. I did start Boy's Life, but about halfway through, I realized that there might be some emotional problems for myself. My partner and I had to put our dog down recently, and I think there's maybe a tough dog death in that book, it felt like. So I had to put that book down. As much as I loved it, it was great. If you like Stephen King, I think, a lot of people say if you like Stephen King, read Robert McCammon. I can already see why people make that comparison. So I'm excited to actually finish a Robert McCammon because I was really loving Boy's Life. And yeah, eventually I want to get back to that. So those are the books I read. And then games I played. All right, I played 4 games. One of those games, Spirit Island, I played 3 times. Spirit Island, one of my favorite games. It's so good. It's so good, and it's not played enough. And I don't play it enough, so I'm trying to remedy that. I played three games of this at 3 different player accounts. So I played the solo January challenge. Just somebody puts up a challenge on Board Game Geek, and you basically just play that. It tells you what spirit to play with, what board, what adversary, and so on. So I played that solo on the channel via the digital game. Had a great time with the otter, the mud spirit. First time playing the mud spirit. I had a really good time with that. I played 2-player with my friend Ian, who you might see on the channel at some point. He and I played, there's a fan-made legacy campaign in which you start with basic spirits and slowly unlock spirits, apparently over 120 games. So I think there's pretty much zero chance of us actually finishing that, but they broke it down into 10-game arcs. So I believe after 10 games, you'll finish an arc, and we'll probably take a break. But we played the first game of that. I played Rivers, and he played Lightning, and that was a really good time. We played the Blitz scenario, which I think I'd only played once a long, long time ago, but that's where your spirit powers are all fast, period. And if they're already fast, you get a discount on them. So it was a very different game. It's pretty wild how much even that changes the game significantly. And I would say probably not as much to my liking. As cool as it is to do everything up front, there's a part of Spirit Island that's special where you get to do some powers, then all the bad stuff happens, and then you're like, okay, well now I get to do my good stuff. A lot of the slow powers are that's the good stuff. And so it felt weird doing everything. There's still part of my brain that thought, well, yeah, they're doing bad stuff now, but I'll still get to do my stuff. But instead I was they did all their stuff, and then it's the next round. So it's very strange, but it's a nice little, really nice that you can just play like that, and it completely changes up the game. Some spirits, for sure, completely changes those spirits. So had a really good time doing that. And then we played a 3-player digital game with Ocean's Hungry Grasp. I played... Who did I play? I don't remember who I played. Who did I play? I don't remember. I don't remember who I played, but then Ian played Slumbering Serpent. So that was a good game as well. I will say 3-player is not my favorite player count of Spirit Island. It just gets long, and it gets a little more bogged down. Even though it's simultaneous, there's still a lot of, well, what are we doing on our turn? Well, I'm going to do this fast power that's probably going to destroy a town here. Or it's oh, well, I need you to leave that town. And then the third person's well, if you destroy that town, then I can leave this town for you. And it's just a lot of that, where my favorite way to play Spirit Island, especially in the lower difficulty, which is where I am, is just play some cards, and then I'll resolve them when it's time. I don't need to really plan out my turn until it gets there, because I just like doing things. So That probably means on higher difficulty I'll get my cheeks clapped. But until I get to that difficulty, I don't mind. I just want to play things and do things. And sometimes that means turns won't be as good as they could be, but I still have a great time doing it. So I'll take that payoff. So that was my plays of Spirit Island. I also played Cusco. So Cusco is by Stefan Feld, and it is the kind of re-implementation of Bora Bora, also by Stefan Feld. He kind of just, for the Queen Games, is doing this city collection where Stefan Feld is doing some new games and some re-implementations of his old games. And each one is basically a Euro. This one is also a Euro, kind of a point salad. I love this game, though. This is one of my favorite Stefan Feld games. I like the changes they've made from Bora Bora. I think it's better than Bora Bora. I do wish the table presence was a little smaller. It's a big game, and it doesn't need to be as big. But there's a lot of moving parts. But at the heart of it, like a lot of Stefan Feld games, you're rolling some dice. You each roll individual dice, and then you're using those dice to perform actions, which I love. That's my favorite part about Stefan Feld games, is there's no perfect answer. You're always going to be at the mercy of the dice. Now, there are ways to mitigate those dice, but there's simply 5 actions. And, there's a board where you move around and drop things off. There's a board you move up tracks. It's like most Euro games. When you explain it, it's not going to sound very exciting, but it just tickles the brain the right way. And, man, it's a good game. So if you've not played Cusco or Bora Bora and can find one of those at a reasonable price, they're excellent games. Bora Bora is still a great game. I just think Cusco fixed some of the problems I had with Bora Bora, but still, it's still a great game. So that was Cusco. I also played Windmill Valley with a buddy named Brooks, who also might be part of that Hateful Eight discussion, if we can rope him in. So Windmill Valley is also a Euro game. It's an interesting game for me. So you each have these 2 little rondelles in front of you, 2 little windmill wheels, and when you move it, they kind of move together. And the action you take is one of the 2 actions, 2 sections of those wheels that are pointing to the top of your board. So you can take one or the other. Sometimes you can take both. And really, that's where the variability comes in, because you can buy tiles to change those actions as the game goes on, which is really cool. So really, that's what you're doing. You're kind of just taking an action on your little wheel. It's an action selection, but there's ways to go up and down on a water track, which means your wheels will spin more or less. There's still ways to even mitigate it further than that. But ultimately, you're collecting tulips, planting those tulips, and putting out windmills on a big board, and collecting like farm cards. So again, Euros aren't going to sound super exciting to hear about, but I think it's a fun game. The things that I would like to see different about Windmill Valley, I wish that on your board you have these 4 rows where you plant your tulips, and there's bonuses across those. I would love to see variable ones of those, because something about the board setup is always the same, and your player boards are always the same. The variability comes in where you upgrade those actions on your wheel, and the cards that you buy, which are they can be both your final scoring cards and special abilities. But something about that doesn't convince my brain that it's variable enough. I think it truly probably is variable enough, but I would love to see a different board layout and a different player board, like an asymmetry. Just because I like that in my Euros. I know it's not for everybody, but I would love that. So I still think it's a great game. It might be my least favorite game by Danny Garcia. Like, I like Barcelona more. I like Arborea more. But I still think it's a good game. And it's very pretty game. And the last game I played was Revive. I played Revive solo. Revive is a great Euro. It's such a simple game. There's really only like 4 actions. You're just going to build, explore, or populate, or play cards, essentially. Very simple. But some of those turns can just combo, and man, it feels good. And you get to unlock technologies. You get a lot of asymmetry, ton of variability in the board and the scoring, and it's so good. So I got to play. One thing I don't like about Revive is the solo mode. The solo mode, in my opinion, goes very against the nature of the game, which is there's a variable end, and a lot of it is you're all exploring this map together, And then there are race elements to get to the outsides of the board, and then also to certain spots to build on the board. When you play solo, you're just opening up the board where you want to go. From the beginning of the game, it's a big square board, and there's a scoring category in 4 different corners. In a solo, you're usually just going to go to 1 or 2, and you just open up that path, and you go that way, and you try and do it within a certain amount of turns. But I've been playing against a fan-made solo variant by, his name is Cell, and he makes a couple of solo variants for games like Nucleum, and I'm going to try Teotihuacan, and so far, I've really liked his solo modes, and the same is true as this one. It's very simple. You flip over a card, and it basically, he acts as a second player, and it feels more like I'm actually playing Revive instead of a beat your own score like arcade mode, which I just don't like that as much. So yeah, this felt like I was playing with a real second player. It's competitive. It's got ways to adjust his scoring up and down. So I got clapped. I got to play with the expansion, which was very fun for the first time. But yeah, I think next time I'll probably bump down the bot to the easier mode and see how I do, and then possibly bump back up. So I played as the Cordyceps, I think that's what their name was, which was a very strange one to play solo, even against a bot. I don't even think I'd recommend that player in a 2-player game, because it all relies on people giving out these leech tokens to the other players, and then you can take those back to either use their technologies or use cards that they have. And in a 2-player game, you only have one option. So I think that faction probably works really well in 3 or 4. I don't think I'd play that faction again. Still a cool faction, but I do think my score was impacted by a lack of opponent to siphon, essentially, or leech off of. But still, I love that game. It's one of my favorite games that's released in the last couple of years. I just think it's excellent. I've never had a bad play of it. And if you like combos, variable scoring, and it's just good. It just tickles my brain the right way. So, yeah, those are the movies I watched, the books I read, and the games I played last week. This was our second Weekly Retch. We did it. I'm 2 for 2, baby. If I started last week, which I did. So, yeah, next week I will probably continue those same books. I don't think I'm going to be starting any other books. Movies, I'm going to talk about. I just went and saw Presents today, so I'll probably talk about that. Maybe do another movie club movie. If anyone's interested in the movie club, let me know, and I can invite you. If it's on Letterboxd, I'll just post the movie each week, and you can watch along. And then games, I don't know what I'm going to play next week. Might be nothing, might be something. We'll see next week. So yeah, that's all. I appreciate y'all watching, and I'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.